William, thanks for coming back on the Mother of All talk shows. Just for those who are unaware, and that will be most people in Western countries, what exactly is happening in the Congo right now?
Thank you very much, Mr. Galloway. It's a real pleasure to be back on your show. Now, for what's happening in the DRC, the current situation, as you stated, it's 7 million people are currently displaced from their homes, and remarkably, 200,000 of those alone were displaced in October. Now, what's been happening in DRC, like in many other places in the global south, has been called the resource curse by much of Western mainstream media. But the reality is that it's not really a resource curse. It's the fact that the West exploits the resources of these countries to their benefits, ensures instability takes place, and no place like has as much evidence of this going on as the DRC. And we can remember going as maybe even as far as Latin America, where the CIA was involved during the Banana Revolution, where it installed a leader favorable to the interest of American companies. The same case happens in DRC, except this one starts way back. For the common person, one of the most evil figures of the 20th century, and no doubt about that, that's a very evil person, is Hitler. And Hitler is reviled because he killed 6 million Jews. Definitely a terrible thing. But what's a figure that's often forgotten is King Leopold, who in the DRC murdered no less than 15 million Congolese people. And the process in which these massacres took place was really inhumane, where, to certify that a soldier had not wasted a single bullet, maybe saving it for something else, shooting game, they had to bring back the hand of the victim. And these men were used to enforce quotas for rubber, which, was needed as the automobile industry in Europe was developing. Rubber definitely was needed to make the tires. And the horrific kind of conditions even pushed the colonialists themselves to say, Leopold, this is too far. Let's take this from you and give it to the Belgian government itself to run it. And what's tragically funny is that the reason Leopold was given the DRC is because, there was no agreement on how best the DRC could be split, because it's the crown jewel of Africa. And the colonialists during the Berlin conference couldn't quite decide on how to go about it. So since then, DRC got its independence. And as you said, you know the figure Lumumba quite well. And Lumumba's only crime was that Congolese resources should be used for the development of Congolese people. And at the time, Belgium had occupied Katanga, which is amongst the areas with the highest concentrations of minerals like copper. And this will deprive the Congolese economy definitely of a huge chunk of what will have gone to its development. And he first went to the United States and tell them, help me get Belgium out. They refused. The UN refused. So he turned to the USSR. And that's when the CIA, alongside the Belgian government, decided, no, this is unacceptable. Congo is too important for us. And so they murdered Lumumba, dissolved his body in acid, bones and everything, and just left a single tooth. So basically what's happening in Congo, just to summarize, is that the West won't let Congo breathe. Congo sits on top of $24 trillion worth of resources, but we still somehow hear Congolese people are starving. It just doesn't make sense. The river Inga itself could power the whole of Africa with electricity and even export to the Middle East and Europe. But somehow Congo is at the very bottom of human development indices. How does that make sense unless there's a intentional sabotage of such a wealthy country?
Who are these insurgents in the eastern part of the country? Who's behind them? Whose interests do they serve?
Now, the role of the insurgents in the Eastern DRC is to basically loot the minerals in Congo. We know Congo is so rich in minerals that you could literally just pick a hole and go dig, and you'll have minerals. You'll have something to sell to, middlemen and whatever. Now, in DRC, you are the most famous. There are over 100 armed groups operating in Congo. But the one that has stolen the spotlight is the M23, which is a Tutsi, predominantly Tutsi group. And the reason for its existence in its current form was after the genocide in Rwanda in 94, there was a push to hunt down the Hutu militia that were responsible for what had happened in Rwanda. And unfortunately, this was pretext basically to occupy DRC and ensure minerals are exploited or stolen from DRC. And this has been ongoing for the longest time. And we can clearly see the West's role in this, because as early as 2002, the West kind of had seen the dots connecting Rwanda, the M23. There are generals who were serving in the M23 that were previously serving in the Rwandan army, that kind of stuff. And instead of, since the West realizes, okay, Rwanda is violating the territorial integrity of a neighbor, let's do something about it, the UK financed half of Rwanda's budget. So how is this supposed to discourage, say, if Rwanda is backing the M23, how is that supposed to discourage Rwanda from backing the M23 more? Where are the consequences for actions? Unless, of course, if you look at a company like Glencore, which is listed in the London Stock Exchange, it operates in the DRC and has a long history of bribery, child labor, ecological destruction. And again, Western companies profiting from the minerals in DRC and using proxies like the M23, which are facilitated by Rwanda. And not just Rwanda, maybe not to just wholly blame Rwanda. Uganda is involved as well. I think a year or 2 years ago, Uganda was forced to pay $250 million for basically violating Congo's territorial integrity. So it's an issue where, we have Museveni, who was trained by the West, and Kagame, who was also trained by the West, being used to facilitate the exploitation of the DRC. And again, just to hammer home the role Britain plays in the exploitation of Africa, we have 101 British listed companies that control 5 minerals worth 1.1 trillion US dollars. And if these companies extract $1 trillion a year from Africa, why doesn't that reflect on the ground?
Well, Rwanda is so respectable a country in Britain that our former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, has a deep and intimate and no doubt lucrative relationship with it. It's so respectable. Arsenal football team is sponsored by it. You can see the name Rwanda on their shirts. It's so respectable. Suella Braverman, as was, wanted to send our refugees there. Why does Rwanda get such a free pass for involvement in such significant crimes?
Not just Rwanda, but all across Africa, we have these so-called puppet states of the West. Where, just going back to Rwanda's case, for example, there really is no reason for Rwanda to be taking migrants from the UK to Rwanda, because what's so special about Rwanda that the UK cannot provide? For instance, the UK is a much wealthier country, and we can argue the UK is much better placed to maybe cater for the needs of migrants than, say, Rwanda. But what we have is the money that it will most probably not trickle down to the average Rwandan, but stick to the elite, is being used to make Rwanda take in refugees that, the UK just doesn't want to deal with, since apparently immigration is a big issue in Europe now. But overall, I think it's just basically an issue where we have puppet states willing to do everything to please whatever the West wants. Let's look at Kenya's case, for example. Kenya now says it will send police to Haiti, but only because the United States said said it will foot the bill up to $200 billion, but obviously expected to increase as maybe the mission increases in scope. And in exchange, we now have, the visits by the British King to Kenya. We have the US ambassador being almost like, Kenya's executive, marketing director. So yeah, we can see there's sort of a give and take where, between the puppet states and their masters. And personally, I think it's unfortunate because it seems we are hitching our wagon to, an obviously failing world order when a new world order seems to be born, and Africa should play a bigger role in its creation than simply being, a puppet, a vassal of the West.
I don't know what the poor Kenyans did to deserve a state visit from King Charles and Queen Camilla. But William Sakwa, we know that you know and that you'll keep us informed. Thank you very much indeed, and the best of luck to African Stream, one of the most important outfits in the world today.